I'll call the meeting to order. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and the city in which we live. Guide us this afternoon as we make any decisions. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
The Newnan City Council work session of August the 8th, 2023 is called to order. This is a work session. It is not a public hearing. And I have a little thing that I wrote that might try to help us set the pace here. Earlier this year, the Newnan City Council adopted a policy that allows for work sessions on rezoning and annexation applications. I believe it's appropriate to state the protocol of the work sessions. These meetings are not a public hearing, so no comments from attending public will be taken. The applicant may be present, but will not make a presentation. In the event that a council member has a question of the applicant, that question may be asked and answered. City staff will provide their report and the applicant's proposal. Council members will have an opportunity to question staff regarding the remarks, and I appreciate your attendance at today's meeting. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. As Mayor Brady stated, so before you is rezoning petition number RZ 2023-02. This is for a little over 35 acres. The property is located at 2037 Union Crossing Bypass. This is the third rezoning attempt I think you all have looked at in the recent times on this piece of property. The difference with this particular project is this is a proposal for a fee-simple, ownership-driven townhome development with public streets. Previously, we've looked at multifamily rental type situations. It is currently zone commercial, RS15, I believe, and they want to seek an RMH designation for the purpose of developing 163 units. Part of the proffer conditions they have suggested is limiting rental, if any, to more than 10% or 16 units total out of the 163. This did go before the Planning Commission at a public hearing. You have in there the conditions that the applicant proffered, additional conditions suggested by staff, and some of the conditions that came out of that Planning Commission public hearing. I will note that at that Planning Commission public hearing, there was no public opposition. We did have someone from the public come, and they were more or less fact-finding and in favor of the proposal. The applicant is here and available. And we do know that there is, I think, an ongoing discussion or concern about the traffic study that was submitted by the applicant versus the analysis by the Director of Engineering, Mr. Clark, who's also present. It's my understanding that Mr. Clark and the applicant have had a conversation about that and are available to answer any questions related to that issue you may have.
Well, then why don't we call Mr. Clark at this time to have his comments regarding the traffic study and the signal warrant study. Mr. Clark, how are you?
Still good.
Good. Good.
I was kind of brought in at the last minute, partly because of another policy that may have come out of your work session regarding a peer review for a traffic impact study and how that would fit in. So I haven't really had an issue with this traffic study. It's more or less paused to see where we want to go with it. Quite frankly, the trips that are generated by this development don't meet the threshold from ITE for a traffic study at all. So if we were following standards, they don't meet the peak hour of 100 trips in the peak hour morning or peak hour, I think 94 is the most they do. So we would probably only have really requested a traffic impact statement. But they did submit a traffic impact study, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. The only question I had was they studied the intersection at Lower Fayetteville Road with the bypass, which you know we have the Lower Fayetteville Road improvement project going on, and their results at the current state of the intersection did not match what our results said. So I question that. I haven't spoken with their traffic engineer. And they did a couple of other things that, obviously they did theirs outside of a school when school was in session, and they tried to factor in for that. They did put a pretty good background growth in there, pretty substantial. They did a warrant study for the signal, and none of the warrants were met. So I guess it's really sort of, I'm looking for guidance on how you all want to, you know, not just this project, but traffic impact studies in general, how you want to.
Right,
I
well,
did,
Yeah,
I
go
did
ahead.
get for example, on another project that's coming before you, I did reach out to our new on-call consultants for a proposal. And they came back with a $3,200 fee for a typical peer review of a traffic impact study, so that's something to consider as well.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Clark regarding this project, rather than just the policy in general? Anyone?
Nope, you just, clearly it doesn't even meet the threshold for it.
If
That's
we're,
what-
if
yeah.
we're gonna follow the standard, you know, protocol for,
Sure.
it's not really in our ordinance, we probably need to look at that. We probably need to put some thresholds in there that would be, you know, common, triggers for a traffic impact study, but, you know.
I understand what you're saying, Mike. I guess, I don't know whether it's a question, more of a comment. Although this project doesn't meet the threshold, with the current projects that are approved in that area and what's coming across on the other side of 85, the impact at the exit, I think it's important that we do take those things into consideration from a traffic study or observation. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
I would definitely agree. It's, what the difficult part is what mitigation would you assign to the individual projects
Right.
separately rather than as a whole?
Yeah, mitigation to me is a kind of a vague term.
It is.
What are you going to do to there's pain? How much mitigation are you going to do to?
Sometimes the mitigation could be extending a turn lane or
Right,
putting
I
a
know.
signal in or, you know, something like
Right,
that.
just-
It's all about the level of service, it's the delay.
Sure.
It's what is the impact to your street segments and
Mm-hmm.
your intersections, and they can kind of quantitate the numbers for that, and then somehow the mitigation can be modeled to show.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
improvement. Sure.
Okay.
Do we have any, speaking of mitigation and the other developments that are around it, do we have anything from the other developments just kind of in the hopper almost? Because I know some projects in the past, we've said, when the signal is warranted
Yes.
at certain intersection, you'll pay X amount. Do we have any of that in the background for any of the ones that are around it to add to this discussion?
What else is around this one? Built out.
Everything at this point that is within the city that's near this is done.
Okay,
With
so
the
there-
exception of, to the north of this parcel is the apartment complex of Springs at Noonan. There's one 5-acre tract that sits in front of it that was zoned commercial. They have yet to develop that portion, so it's unknown what those uses might be and how they might impact traffic flow. That would be really the only unknown that would be near this area that's within our control. I do know there's a Mercedes dealership apparently is going in the county just south of this piece. And there may be some development on that county portion south of here. We're not privy to some of that. The only reason we know about the Mercedes dealership is he showed up at the planning commission in favor. And we thought maybe he was gonna put a key in the mailboxes. We didn't know. And so,
Surprise.
that's the only reason we were familiar. So that's gonna impact. But again, not anything we can have direct control over. Yes, sir.
So that neighborhood across the street doesn't have any outstanding anything?
Lake Shore does not. It is all built out.
With going from RS-15 to RMH, they're proposing 163 units. With RS-15, what could conceivably, how many units could go in there?
I think it's 2.5 units per acre, if I'm not mistaken, and I have to do the math on that, but it'd be, somebody's quicker of a calculator than I am.
And one of the things I think we need to keep in mind about this property that it's come before us, I think you said that like this is probably the third time, is the challenge geographically
Correct.
that this property represents.
I agree.
And
That's been one of the major setbacks.
Right.
And that's been why we had the multifamily, the higher level density, intensity on the property, because so much of this property can't be touched.
Correct, and that's one thing to note about this project, is they are steering clear of the wetland and stream areas. To the east, between 85 and the bypass, and this particular concept plan highlights something that came as a result of the planning commission, where the applicants agreed to, where you see the yellow highlighted townhouse units, all four sides are gonna get the same front treatment. So it's gonna be kind of a masonry brick, all four sides. And that visibility will, you know, as it's higher visibility, the better the elevations, but all the townhouses will meet the city's townhouse standards as far as architectural material, offsetting. They are asking for a reduction in lot width and size on the rear loaded, which I think is about half of what their total proposal is. But yes, sir, Mayor, to your point, the biggest, one of the significant differences in this proposal versus the other two you've seen is there will be no encroachment or, you know, at least not shown on this concept plan into the wetlands, into the buffer. But you are correct. Out of that 36-acre tract, you have a very small net tract that's actually developable because
So
a good, you know, quarter of this property is subject to wetlands and buffer streams.
Sure.
So what is the actual buildable acreage?
I don't know. I did know at one point. My guess, and the applicant may know more about this. I know y'all have had it surveyed, but just a rough estimate would be probably 20 acres, maybe.
Okay,
Do you know
Thank
for
you.
sure? Do you-
I don't.
Okay.
okay,
I have a question.
sure.
What's the, I see there's proffers on here related to size and lot width. Where did those come from, and what is,
That was the applicant's request, and they may, and I mean, my guess would be that, and maybe they can answer that question better than I, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it's driven in part by the constraints of the property you have and getting some of that density on there. Is that accurate? And I think that's where that's mainly driven
because
from.
our minimum is what, 18?
1,800, I think it's 1,600, 1,800 square feet minimum for townhomes and about a 26-foot wide lot. And- Is that right?
Okay, so I get 20, wanting to reduce from 26 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to figure out why the size of the unit is then called out if it's within what we think are the.
I think it's 1,800 square feet is our minimum, so they want to go 1,750 on a 20-foot wide lot on those that are rear loaded only, so about half those. And that's about roughly some of the size of the Nickel Creek lots, the other condominium that were rezoning projects that y'all had approved and during those
Y'all know
hearings.
I don't have any problem with smaller houses. I mean,
Yeah,
that's-
right.
I mean,
Would you do us a favor and show us where this is lining up on the map over here? Can you point to Lower Fayetteville Road and the bypass?
So this is the bypass.
Okay,
This is 85. Lower
Yes.
Fayetteville Road is up nine.
oh, okay, all right, so it's back in the middle of the track.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The springs at Noonan are just north.
Okay, all right.
There's like
good.
the
And this
Georgia
is south.
Power easement.
Yeah,
And then just north of that, the property line's close to that. This is the springs at Noonan. I think it was over 500 unit apartment complex
Yeah.
with a 5 acre tract that sits vacant currently. Lakeshore subdivision is over this way.
yeah, okay, thank you
Yes,
very
sir.
much.
So,
Okay, so can I continue my questions?
Sure.
My questions also around house size is since our minimum is 1,800 square feet, and you've asked for a smaller product, is there a lower number that you're looking for, but you just kind of didn't put it out there?
I would love to,
yep,
I would love
If
to,
you-
I apologize.
if you'll state your name for the record, please.
My apologies. My name is Joe Mosca, and I work for Ryan Homes, or NVR. We're a national home builder. We would love smaller if possible, but in all reality, I was trying to just fit into the constraints of the government here and trying to fit in a little bit less than 1,800. 1,750 felt right. We have product that fits 1,750. If you were to go smaller, that would even be better, but 1,750 works for us as well.
Okay, and I'm going somewhere with this. If you
Mhm,
had
I can
smaller-
tell.
If you had smaller footprints, could you then have a house price that's less?
Yeah, the smaller the
To
footprint,
accommodate workforce housing?
not necessarily workforce housing, but the smaller the footprint, the more affordable the house could be, yes.
What price range do you consider workforce housing?
I think that's contingent upon the municipality here, but where these homes would be priced, and it's all contingent upon the market. But right now, we're thinking these are gonna be high threes to mid fours.
But if smaller, what would it be?
It all kind of it's contingent upon the size of the actual unit. And if I had to do a one-car garage, then that would be, it's all contingent. So right now, these are all two-car garages. They're a one-car garage and 1,400 square feet with minimal architectural restrictions. It'll be low threes. It's just kind of it's all contingent upon what is required to be in the house. And that's exterior related.
So you answered my question.
Oh.
I see LDO Coweta LLC is the applicant, and part of that is for the Cates Family Apartment, but my question was gonna be, who's the builder?
NVR will
you
be
are
the
the
builder.
And you have a contract to take down the lots after development?
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Ferry with LDL Coweta. Do you want my address? 218 Duck Drive, Sonoy. So we're working that contract out. So we've been working very closely with NVR on this property for probably, 6 months now?
Yeah.
And it took a while to get to contract for us to purchase the property. And it wouldn't, when we're working towards a contract, if we can get a contract with the homeowner or with the home builder, it wouldn't make much sense to put us in that position of defining a lot price when we really don't know what the zoning's gonna allow us. So once we come out of zoning, if we're successful, then we'll enter into a contract with NVR.
Understand the process?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Did I interrupt you, your questions? Do you have
No,
more questions?
I probably do, just looking for zoning.
I just had a question to follow on with her question, though, is if you could go smaller, what would your ideal footprint be, or your size?
I mean, it depends. It depends on several things as well. So one of the ordinances or one of the requirements here was that I think over 51% had to be rear entry, and the balance had to be front entry. So it's generally cheaper for us to build a front entry garage than a rear entry garage. So it is a good question. It's just kind of hard to answer until I have all the facts and figures.
If there weren't any constraints, what would you build?
What would I build here? Personally, I'd probably build a one-car garage townhome unit, 165 of them approximately, maybe about 1,400 square feet.
So,
What would that cost you?
I mean, that's all contingent upon the lot price as well, but we'd probably be in the low threes.
Your development costs aren't gonna change though, regardless of what he plans to build, correct?
The biggest effect on our lot cost right now is time. We have no idea, so the process it takes to get from where we are now through, I'm assuming a site plan review, and then into civil drawing, that review could put us a year from now before we're constructing. And we saw what happened in the previous year with some of our costs. We're seeing some regulation of that, Mayor, with the PVC, the DIP pipes are starting to regulate a little bit. Concrete is not. Concrete still remains very expensive compared to everything we've experienced over, just through my experience alone. And asphalt, y'all just saw the bid that y'all received for those roads is also not changing. So we look at what is the largest portions of our project, being concrete and asphalt. We're not seeing significant drops. Where we are starting to see some drops are in the pipes. But it's not an overwhelming where I could say that prices are gonna continue to come down, but costs are just very, very expensive.
So his development cost and his markup, it provides you with a lot price. I mean, it's pretty simple.
And then from there, we price it to the market.
That's right.
Correct. So we
So-
do market competitive analysis for the
Whether or
market.
not you want to do a 1,400 or a
Correct, and
1,700
that-
or a 15, is a
correct.
function of what you're going to pay for that lot,
Correct.
because you've got to recover.
Correct. However, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, if you were to do, hypothetically speaking, all front entry, that's a cheaper lot cost because there's not as much asphalt or concrete involved. So there's a lot of different minutia involved in it.
If you change that model of that square footage, what happens to the amenity package?
We could keep the same, we would keep a similar amenity package.
Similar amenity package?
Yeah, we can keep the same amenity package.
I don't know about that.
Ah,
I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean-
When you start lowering those, at what was presented by NVR in this package, it's considered a higher-end unit. They're very attractive. Four-side brick, as requested by Planning Commission on those fronts, is even more cost And of course, as Joe pointed out, the rear entry does add expense to the development, but also adds expense to them. So all of these are increasing the cost. If we eliminate some of those things and turn it into more of of something that's more affordable, and I don't want to use that word in a negative way, I think that's a positive word, but if we turn it into something that actually works towards what we're talking about here, the ability to afford to pay and maintain those amenities long-term may also change. We'd have to look at the economics of that also.
Well, what I'm trying to do is point out the difficulty that not only we have in this city, but everywhere, to develop workforce housing at an affordable price because of the development cost. And what happens when you've not only stepped through the cost of concrete and land and development and planning and the cost of time, and the cost of regulation. We understand that's a problem. We understand that's an issue. Not here as much as some other places.
I agree.
But it's there. And, you know, when you step through those things, when your number is your number, his number's gotta be his number, or it just doesn't go to market.
That's correct.
That's just what we are dealing with.
It is. There's so many factors that go into this, and you could pull a little bit out here and there, but I think what you summarized right there is spot on. We didn't even mention the land price in that whole discussion. Thankfully, that's set right now through our contract on the property. That's not changing. It's still extremely high.
No, we understand it's A&D.
Yeah.
To answer your question, one of those GMA classes I went to this summer pointed out what the affordability range is and how much somebody could afford on a house. So 60% of AMI is as low as 180 is all they could really afford, but up to 100% of AMI is 305.
Define AMI?
Area median income, affordability, I don't wanna prolong it, but affordability is basically not paying more than a third of your salary towards housing. So they set those based on the area median, which is the middle, so half the people make more and half the people make less. And use it as a measure of affordability of housing. And so that smaller product that you're talking about might actually be workforce housing. And I wanted to point that out.
But
I-
those numbers may not be for our area, right?
This is statewide.
So it's a statewide, but not a local area.
And actually, it's more geared towards, I think the one who did it was the Georgia Power representative representing Augusta
Okay.
in their metro area.
Which is definitely very different than here.
So,
Any other, I'm sorry.
no, you're gonna
Go
continue?
ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think, all right, I attended some classes myself from GMA on affordable housing just recently. And I've attended some 5 years ago, so I don't want to get into the debate about affordable, what's workforce housing. But the reality is, nobody can clearly define it.
Yes.
And even at this last meeting in GMA, which I said there's 150 different representatives from across the state, all clamoring for the definition of affordable housing. The instructors couldn't come up with a definitive answer, so I think the best answer I heard was from a guy in Fayetteville that went against the grain and said, affordable, you'd have to just decide in your community if it works or it doesn't. And I don't think we can be lowering standards of housing and things of that sort and looking for smaller, et cetera. When you talk about a single-car garage, for example, I understand the marketing aspect of it and the profitability. If you look at a one-car garage, then how many, if you go smaller, are you asking for more than 163? Now, that seems to me that's your number, right? So now your density is more. And now you go into a single-car garage, for example, you are begging for lack of parking space, and you're begging and driving people into the streets. I mean, I live in that, so I'm just saying, we got to be very careful when we start approaching workforce affordability. If it works for Noonan, that would be great. But to lower standards, but to lower entry-level pricing for the sake of doing it with the hopes or the idea that we're gonna solve that problem, I think we're whistling in the wind, spitting in the wind, quite frankly. All right, that being said, I was going through some of the notes, okay? So I like some of the things that you're presenting, that you presented before the Planning Commission. I like the idea, the concept of you having the front of the exposure on, I thought that's a good idea. The only thing that trips me up a little bit when you said I think it was, Mr. Ferry said that the proposed plan is conceptual in nature. So that kind of, I think I know what conceptual in nature is, but I would like clarity on what so things could, what you're saying, if we approve this, that we're approving a conception that is fluid.
Well, that's a fair point. Let me address that. The idea of putting a concept plan together means that we didn't go into all the requirements of a full set of construction drawings to determine the size. Can we flip back to the other drawing real quick, the overall? Thank you. To determine the size of the ponds, to determine the exact location of those ponds. Those things are indeed fluid, and that's an engineering study. So those ponds, if they get bigger, are going to impact the number of lots that we would have.
Sure.
So that's what I meant by conceptual.
Okay.
And, you know, I think another way of addressing it may also be that that this plan, although it takes topography into consideration, it's not a ground run topo where you know the exact elevation of each of these points.
Right.
So those roads might shift a bit also. That's the idea of a concept in nature. It didn't mean necessarily that the building plan or the overall plan was flawed. It just means that it didn't go into that high engineered level that we
Good.
will need when we get to construction, should we be
Yeah,
successful.
thank you for clarifying, I appreciate
Yes, sir.
that. There seems to be some concern from the Planning Commission. Mr. Hamlin suggests that, I think, are we getting to, I mean, I kind of get concerned along that pathway that it's going to be nothing but car dealerships, townhouses, and apartments. And that's kind of what it appears that we're getting in density. So part of my concern is that growth, because everything is going to be driving to the lower Fayetteville and to the Poplar Road exit, shopping, et cetera, all going to feed into there. So, and not to mention, we have 586 units on the other side of 85 there. That's coming. That's all going to be part of this. So when I see these, I like conceptually, it kind of maybe fits, but I get concerned about long-term with some of these projects that are coming before us.
To follow on that, so you said these are gonna be public roads
That's correct.
internally? Is, looking at it, again, we don't have your discussion about the traffic study, and I appreciate that, you know, and the subdivision right across the road, that the relationship to where it is with the other intersections, the other developments going in, you know, looking at this a bigger holistic approach, the density, I mean, it's gonna be sizable, especially not having, you know, the transportation has always been an issue. Getting people in and getting people out. And I don't know if there's necessarily a need to get smaller houses, again, because then you're gonna have to drive up the number of houses to try to make your numbers work, and I get that. It's just a lot of houses on 35 acres, and with a good portion of that not usable.
That's 35, it's on 20 acres. I think we need to be clear with that.
I know, yeah.
Give or take, yeah. And it is less dense than some of the earlier ones you looked at. And I think this point here, this major ingress egress points aligns with a median cut that goes directly across to Lake Shore. And they've got a small right-in, right-out only secondary entrance on the south side of the property to help with traffic flow and getting in and out. Of course, the unknown, to Mr. Clark's point, and the other point was, you know, the study needs to kind of align with what we have, and that's the conversation that needs to keep on happening until we get some resolution of that.
Well, and that it abuts the county. We don't know what their total intentions are either.
No.
Any other questions?
I will point out, that typically what we do is we'll say these things are consistent with what you're seeing as far as concept, elevations. As far as amenity packages, you will find in this concept that it has a lot more amenities than some of the current townhome projects we have under construction right now that we're allowed by right. So they are trying, I think, to bring a little bit higher quality into this particular project compared to some of the
So
other
for me,
townhome projects.
the price point, I have zero issue with the price point. I think it's a good price point, a good range. I do have one question with the HOA I see here, back in here also, that Mr. Ferry provided the school with a phases, I think it was how, the word he was using. But anyway, now you say build out, you're gonna manage the property from the HOA side of it. And so I just want to be clear, is that 100% build out, 80% build out, 90% build out? Because that does vary in certain develops.
Councilman, we tend to keep those to 100%. If we have a very active homeowner group, we can make those choices early, but our covenants are clear. The declarant keeps it until 100% of build out. We would love to, believe me, I'd love to hand them over early. It just doesn't work.
Okay, and with your HOA, what do you have in play that actually would monitor to be able to stick to the 16 rentals or 10% rentals? What do you have
When we,
that, how are you going to monitor that?
as we are the declarant, it's easy for us to monitor. As it turns into it's monitored by the owners, that would be more of an issue that they would have to keep. Generally, we hand the projects over to a company like Beacon or.
Right,
or-
okay,
or,
that's what I
Georgia
wanted to hear,
Community.
okay.
Once we do that, they have a system set up, and should the owners decide to keep that system in place and keep that management group, that type of thing is a lot easier to manage, because every time the property changes hands, they need to be notified by
Right.
covenant. And so, we do a good job through that point.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I've been a part of many different subdivisions, and when we hand those over, the owners they think that they want to save that couple $1,000s that they pay to the management
Yeah,
companies.
that's kind of I'm not really concerned about the rentals, because honestly, at the end of the day, it's difficult to monitor. And nobody's buying $490,000 homes as an investment property to rent, typically.
Typically,
So that's not an entry level that is affordable.
that's correct, yes, sir.
Anyway,
But I think
I've
in all
yacked
fair-
enough.
I think in all fairness, that you did mention that 10% because in conversation, that somebody will buy it, they may have to relocate, and they may
Right.
want to rent that out. So we
Sure.
wanted to provide that. We don't want to say it's 100% home ownership when that might not be the case. Thank you.
I have a quick question regarding like the watershed and the water area behind there. Further, up in the Stillwood area, they have a problem with their water. Are those houses towards the back of the lot within 100-year, 500-year, I don't know, whatever floodplain area that it's not gonna become an issue? Is it far enough? Do you have enough clearance?
We are out of the flood, and we are out of the buffers created by the city. There's as you get to the point, you kind of look at this, I don't know, the southern portion of the property might actually be are we inverted on this? But it's, okay, the southern part of the property is not a perennial stream, it's an intermittent stream, and so it has a much smaller, a more typical buffer that you see in the metro area. However, in the city, as you move and it turns into a perennial stream, as you move further north, it turns into a perennial stream, and then it has larger buffers, and we're outside of those also.
Because I'm just thinking, this last week, we've had some, the bottom drops out.
Yes, sir.
And, between the water running off the interstate and the water off all all the surfaces, I don't know what that looks like, in the middle of all that. If those houses start getting flooded, it becomes an issue, and then, you know, those homeowners eventually come back to us, and say, hey, what's the problem? Because
Yes,
y'all
sir.
are long gone.
No, we'll also, I completely appreciate that. We deal with stormwater issues extensively in our projects. But we also will meet whatever the requirements are of the city in not only water quality, but water quantity, which affects what you're talking about. So we'll meet those in those ponds, and that's why I said earlier, we don't know the size of those ponds. We may study this and determine that the watershed is much bigger than we thought it was, and we have to increase those sizes. And we would not try to rearrange it significantly to try to win lots back. We might do arrangement here and there, and that's why I said this is more conceptual, to try to save that lot number, because that's part of the economics of the project. But if the pond needs to grow in order to maintain a water quality or water quantity concept that we have to hit, we'll do that.
I have another question on excuse me, but I'm just going through the notes from the planning commission, and I made some notes myself. There was a question about landscaping, and Mike Furbush was concerned, and Mr. Ferry said that there was very little room for landscaping, and he was looking to meet with Mike to better understand. Do you know if that meeting has taken place, or any meeting with you and Mike?
It wasn't a meeting with Mike and I. I actually asked my landscape architect, who speaks that language precisely, to meet with him, and they had that conversation. Yes, sir.
Well, our ordinance is the ordinance.
Yes, sir.
And so Mike's concern may be well-founded, but you're gonna have to adhere to the ordinance.
Of course.
Yeah, so, and you agree to that.
Yes.
Right.
And did you say the back alleys were privately owned? All the alleyways and rear entries?
All the alleyways will be private, yes.
Okay. So, you and I both know, Mr. Terry, in the development world, anything and everything can happen. All is possible. So the Cates Family Partnership knows and understands, though, if this is rezoned and for some reason you can't develop or they can't buy, the Cates Family Partnership has a rezoned piece of property they now own. You comment on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In our contract with them, we spell out exactly what our intentions are, and they had to sign that application that we submitted to the city, so they know exactly what we're proposing to do.
Okay.
When it comes to not only the scope of what we're doing, but the number of units, the impact, and everything associated with
All
it.
right, thank you. Any other questions of staff or the applicant? Anything else from the
This
staff?
comes back to you August 22nd for a public hearing. Is there anything of the applicant or staff you would like to see between now and then? Any from this conversation, discussion?
I guess one other quick thing is, that whole area, you know, the wetlands, is not gonna be disturbed at all. And I know the link doesn't run through there. I mean, and we've done some nice stuff with the link going through the areas here behind the lofts and stuff like that. Is there any plan for any kind of trails or paths or anything back there, or is it completely undisturbed?
You wanna talk-
It's
address
part of an amenity to the homeowners.
We had proposed is leaving it just vacant, woodland. In our opinion, crossing that creek might be a difficult thing to do, better just left undisturbed. And I wouldn't want to create another issue with tree preservation, to go ahead and create trails. I don't know what kind of impact we would have on it. I would just as soon leave it undisturbed.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Anything?
Thank you for your time, and
Appreciate it.
and I appreciate this kind of benchmark for looking at what affordable and what your kind of sweet spot would be if you were given the opportunity. For those that don't know, I work for Habitat for Humanity, and therefore the numbers there and working with HUD are what I do every day. And so I think that is something that we have absolutely got to look at in Newnan and Coward County, is workforce affordable housing and helping the market reach those goals with us and not creating more boundaries for them to keep them from doing that. So thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We're adjourned. Thank you.